This is an all-new Hilux, which is a very exciting thing in and of itself. However, this in particular has no engine. Say hello to the all-electric Toyota Hilux EV. Now, the Toyota Hilux EV that we have here represents the very latest generation of Toyota Hilux, although it remains built off of the very familiar IMV platform that has underpinned the Hilux as well as the Innova and several other models for quite some time. Adapted for electric mobility, this truck uses dual motors, one over the front axle, one over the rear axle, to provide a total system output of 196 PS, although a total system output torque figure has not been provided. Powering those two motors is a 59 kilowatt hour NMC battery, which is relatively small because it has to fit within the IMV frame. As a result, this truck has a WLTP rated range of just 257 kilometers on a single charge, which is rather disappointing. Now, in terms of charging, at the very least, that's not too bad, because in terms of AC charging, this truck will accept up to 10 kilowatt AC, which means that dead to full takes about 6 hours. In terms of DC charging, it can accept up to 125 kilowatts, which means that a 10 to 80% charge takes half an hour. Not great, but acceptable. But of course, talking about a new Hilux, we have to talk about its design. And the design of the new Hilux is very different. Now, one could argue that this new generation Hilux is just a very heavy facelift of the vehicle before it. But that said, all they've really carried over is the platform as well as the doors. Aside from that, every piece of sheet metal on this truck is brand new, and that starts with the face. So up front, we now get full LED headlights replete with this LED daytime running light pattern, which I think looks quite good. On top of that, it is a lot slimmer than before, with the main beam and high beam now integrated into a singular projector unit, which now makes the light signature a little bit cleaner. The fog lights still remain, although they have now been relocated down here toward the middle of the bumper. Where they used to live, you now get this little piece of contrasting black plastic in order to make the front end look a little bit more sculpted. In fact, sculpted seems to be the name of the game with the new Hilux, because you can tell up front there are so many different surfaces at play here in order to make this front end look a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more modern. One of the more interesting features to me is the fact that they have actually ditched the Toyota logo, and instead we now have the Toyota logo type instead. And this to me feels a lot more assertive, particularly given the fact that the Hilux has been the best-selling truck in Malaysia for a very long time indeed. On top of that, we still get a little bit of contrast plastic down here, as well as a nice strong bash plate. And one of the things that you might not be able to see from here is the fact that underneath the bumper, there is even more cladding in order to protect not only this car's electric motors, but also the electric battery that lives between the two axles. Which means that although this is an electric Hilux that is most likely going to be spending the most of its time on open roads and sealed surfaces, this truck is still incredibly tough, regardless of its choice of motivation. Now, moving down the side, you can see that sculpting has continued not only onto the bonnet, but also down onto the fenders, where we now have far more straight lines in order to help emphasize the fact that this is a large, chunky new truck. Now, in terms of rolling stock, this car rides on 17-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Bridgestone Dweller tires. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the tires themselves are not that bad. It's the wheels that I find to be quite interesting, because although these are completely solid alloy wheels, they do still have a slightly more aerodynamic design to them in order to improve this car's aerodynamic profile, although this is still a truck. Now, moving further down the side, you get black wing mirror caps regardless of which model you go for, and you also get black door handles. These are painted black door handles, not unpainted plastic. But one of the things that I would like to point out here is the fact there are 3 fins that actually live on the inside of the wing mirror in order to improve the aerodynamic profile of this car, and also to reduce the amount of buffeting that might occur around the A-pillar in order to improve NVH. As we move further down the side, you also get a set of standard fit side steps here, which are load bearing. And more importantly, because they are this nice grippy plastic, it does mean that in order to get grip to get in and out of the truck, that shouldn't be too difficult at all. And because they are hard wearing plastic, should you need to just hose them down, that shouldn't be an issue at all. That said, however, this is a truck, which means that we need to talk a lot about what's going on back there. And that's because being a truck, this truck cannot just look good, it also has to be very functional. And you can tell that functionality was something of a priority for Toyota. For example, we now get built-in side steps here, which actually help to improve access into the load bed this way, while back here we also get new taillight design with a new LED taillight signature, which I do quite like a lot. You have an LED brake light here, but the indicator remains a bulb type affair, which is an interesting omission, but it's a truck after all. We also get back here a newly redesigned tailgate with Toyota stamped into the metalwork here, with Hilux up here on the latch. We also have the BEV badge here, which is one way to tell that this is an all-electric truck, assuming that the white number plate doesn't give it away. Now, one of the things that I find to be quite interesting about the Hilux EV is the fact that this is a truck that comes in at about 220, 230,000 ringgit. And yet, despite this sitting on the top end of the truck market, this tailgate, for example, offers no assistance. So I will warn you now, this is about to get loud. When you open this latch, it just drops. Now, when you compare that to vehicles like the Ford Ranger Platinum, as well as several other trucks that usually offer some kind of damping or some kind of spring loading in order to improve the way this comes down in a slightly less agricultural fashion, the Hilux doesn't bother. More annoyingly is the fact that because there are no hydraulic dampers or a spring-loaded mechanism within the hinge, it also means that closing this tailgate is quite difficult. The other thing that's actually been hampered about this tailgate or this payload capacity is the fact that right now, because this is an all-electric truck, the payload capacity has been reduced quite significantly. So on usual pickup trucks, and in fact even diesel-powered Hilux models, you can carry up to a ton worth of stuff back here. But unfortunately for this, you can only do 750 kilograms. The same goes when it comes to towing capacity, because even though those electric motors produce quite a lot of torque, instead of being able to haul up to 3.5 tons that you would on a regular Hilux, this car can only do 1.6 tons, which I find to be quite disappointing. And it does also limit the capability of the Hilux EV as a proper, usable, daily drivable truck, which means that there are a lot of compromises back here when it comes to choosing a EV over the current crop of diesel Hilux models. That said, however, when you look at the bed itself, not only do you have a spray-in liner here, which is always nice to see, nice and tough in order for you to take things in and out, you also have these nice solid metal hooks in order to tie things down and keep things safe. Unfortunately, there is no rail system, nor are there any bars back here, but of course these can be installed without too much issue. But bear in mind that this truck already has a WLTP rated range of 257 kilometers on a single charge. I can only imagine that if you add more weight back here, that's going to be pretty significantly compromised. Now, inside the new Hilux, this is very much a new vehicle as far as I'm concerned, because this interior design is completely different compared to what we've seen from other Hiluxes in the past. So for example, we have a brand new steering wheel here, which appears to have been lifted from a much larger, much posher Land Cruiser, again with Toyota scripting up here, lots of big chunky buttons. We now have a new infotainment display here, which is also much larger and of a far higher quality than before, and it does come with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which at the moment doesn't seem to want to work. Moving beyond that, we also have physical buttons for the HVAC controls, as well as more physical buttons down here in order to control the hill descent control, as well as the drive mode selector. Now, talking about the drive mode selector, there are 3 drive modes to choose from, that being normal, eco, and sport. And then in the MTS, which is your multi-terrain select, there you have far more options to choose from. So you have dirt, sand, mud, mogul, and rock. And you also have an automatic mode where the car will determine which off-road mode is best based on the conditions that it can sense all on its own, which I find to be quite impressive. Now, moving beyond that, of course, in addition to this screen, there's also a fully digital instrument cluster like we've seen from other Toyota models before, and it looks quite good. And we also have a stubby gear selector down here, which is actually shared with other hybrid models, as well as the Toyota BZ4X, where its motion is not necessarily front and rear, but instead you sort of have to pull it to the right and then push it forward for reverse, pull it down for drive, and then when you're in drive, you can also pull it down again to go into B mode, which is basically brake regen. And as far as I'm concerned, I do think that this gear selector does feel a lot better than those sort of stalk mounted or steering wheel stalk mounted gear selectors rather, and I find that this is a lot more intuitive to use. Of course, the first time you use it, it's a little bit confusing because the motion isn't exactly typical, but once you're done with that, or once you're used to it, it does feel pretty fine. There's a wireless charging pad here, a couple of cup holders here, 2 more cup holders on either side of the dashboard, as well as a couple of USB-C ports up front. Now, talking specifically about these USB-C ports, these have been a little bit of an issue for me, because what a USB-C port suggests is that you should have access to high power, which would be great when you're trying to charge up devices, etc. However, based on my testing, these are only outputting about 8 watts, which means that charging up my phone has been a very difficult affair. In fact, more often than not, when I use it for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, I often leave the car at the end of my journey with a lower state of charge on my phone than I did when I arrived. This is not that great. There is a wireless charging pad underneath, fine, but I can't imagine that to be very fast. Although that said, I do at least have a decently sized center glove box here, which not only comes with a 12-volt socket, but also a 2-pin household plug, which means that if you do actually have something that can fit into that, you can charge up a device quite quickly. In addition to this, of course, we have decently large door bins, big enough for a liter-sized bottle, as well as dual glove boxes on the passenger side, one on the top and one on the bottom. That said though, the one on the top is kind of shallow, also not lined in felt, which means that anything that you put in there will rattle about, and the same goes for the larger glove box underneath, which is also not lined in felt. Now, I find that to be a little bit irritating, because that feels like an oversight in quality that the rest of the cabin doesn't seem to have issue with. I say that because yes, while the top of the dash might be hard plastic, the dash front is nice and soft. The same goes for the majority of the door cards, where everything that you touch and feel feels nice and soft, which means that there has very clearly been some degree of attention lavished on this car in order to ensure that this interior feels upmarket, but that hasn't extended to the glove boxes. Now, in terms of ergonomics, this being a Toyota, naturally things are pretty good. The driver's seat is powered with not only lumbar adjustment, but also base angle adjustment, which means that you can get very comfortable in the driver's seat. And in addition to that, the steering wheel is also very adjustable indeed, which means that it's very easy to get into a comfortable driving position to cover long distances. Although, this being the electric one, you won't be able to cover that much distance anyway. And because there are lots of physical controls and because of the placement of the screen, it just means that everything falls very easily to hand. This feels like the sort of sensibility that you've come to expect from Toyota, and the Toyota Hilux EV does not disappoint at all in that regard. However, if I wanted to complain about one particular thing, it has to do with this car's 360-degree camera. Because while this screen is all very good, in order to trigger the camera, you have to use a button that's kind of hidden all the way down here underneath my right knee. Worst of all, once you do press that button, the quality of the 360-degree camera is pretty shocking, to say the least. This feels like the sort of aftermarket system that you would have seen fitted to something like a Yaris or a Vios. And when you take that system and apply it to this much higher resolution screen, it just looks tremendously disappointing. Oh well, at the very least, despite that, because this is a Hilux and because you have a very good vantage point, a very good view out, it does mean that placing the car on the road is not that difficult, parking it is not that difficult, which means that the lackluster 360-degree camera isn't that much of an impedance in terms of you being able to maneuver the vehicle. Now, in the back of the Hilux EV, life is pretty good. Now, I'm about 170 centimeters, the national average, and with the front seat set up in my driving position, I have a pretty good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom despite this car's relatively upright backrest. I have plenty of space for my feet. There is a little bit of a hump in the floor, but it doesn't really eat that much into space. And because the front seats are mounted quite high, I actually have enough room to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me. Another interesting attention to detail from Toyota is the fact that these rear seats are actually mounted a little bit higher than the ones in the front, which means that I have a pretty commanding view all the way out of the car, which means that life back here is pretty good. In terms of amenities, I have a small pocket here as well as another pocket here. I have a door bin here, which is large enough for a half-liter size bottle. I've got pockets behind the front seats as well as load-bearing 3-kilogram hooks here just underneath my knee. I've got a couple of USB-C ports, a couple of crotch coolers because they are very, very low. And of course, I have this deployable center armrest here with a couple of cup holders, which unfortunately folds down like that. Now, aside from that, because I am sat quite high, like I said, I have a good view out. There are ISOFIX mounts back here for you to fit child seats, although that said, because the wheelbase on this truck is not very long and because these doors do not open very wide, a bulky rear-facing child seat might present a little bit of a challenge. But that said, I don't think the Hilux EV is any worse than other pickup trucks on the market, which means that this is generally just par for the course for pickup trucks as it stands. Now, one of the things I would have liked in the back of this Hilux at least would have been a slightly lighter upholstery color. As I'm sat here in this rather dim car park, this black interior colorway is not great. While the leather certainly feels like of a very high quality with a little bit of perforation here and there, it just feels very gloomy in here. And no doubt as a result of this car's standard tinting, that's not exactly helping affairs either. That said, however, the driving experience of this Hilux EV is truly like no other truck before it, at least not for me. Because while I am very familiar with pickup trucks and I understand kind of the way they work, this Hilux EV is something completely different. And I'd put that down entirely to the powertrain. Now, driving the all-electric Hilux is, as I mentioned, a very strange and slightly improved thing. It's very different from what you've come to expect from a pickup truck. Now, I say this because while a lot of these controls, for example, and the overall experience might feel familiar in terms of making it feel like a truck, in terms of its rather slow steering and the very tall driving position, this is all very familiar to truck drivers. However, what might be a bit different is the fact that when you put your foot down, this truck reacts like nothing else you've ever driven before, because obviously this is electric. As punchy as the 2.8-litre turbo diesels have been for the Hilux, believe me, they have nothing on this all-electric powertrain, because like other EVs, when you put your foot down, the car just instantly responds and takes off. And as it does so in a way that's far more refined than any other Hilux before it, obviously because you don't have a nice big diesel engine up front, creating a lot of clatter. But also because of the lack of noise, Toyota has also taken a little bit more time to ensure that this cabin feels a lot more refined, which means that, for example, the Bridgestone tires do not kick up nearly as much noise as you might expect, also likely because they are all-terrain tires rather than mud terrain. And in addition to that, the wind noise in this car is also very, very well addressed. At no point, in fact, in here does it feel like a particularly noisy place to be up to the national speed limit. And the thing is, I mentioned the national speed limit because I feel like that's sort of kind of where the Hilux really needs to stop going. This isn't a truck that's meant for you to drive a great amount of distance at a great amount of speed. Firstly, great distance is already a challenge for this thing, given that its fully charged range is only 257 kilometers. But I can only imagine that if you were to drive this at great speed, then you'll probably be doing about 180 kilometers between stops. That's not great, given the fact that that means you can't even get all the way to Ipoh in this thing, which is... ugh. Now, if you look at this as an urban truck, whatever it is that is, then it's not so bad, because as you're sat here, you're very comfortable, you're very refined, you have all the appointments that you might want, and in terms of overall consumption, the car will do, or it has been averaging with me at least, about 23 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that with this battery pack that's very nearly 60 kilowatts, again, you're looking at a little bit over 200 kilometers on a single charge. That's all fine. And when you add to that the fact that this car comes with the full suite of active safety features from Toyota, then again, it creates this situation where driving this has been relatively pleasant. As an urban runabout, if you can call it that, it has been entirely acceptable, entirely reasonable, and entirely good, for lack of better phrasing. It's just good. It's quiet, it's responsive, commanding driving position, full ADAS suite, excellent adaptive cruise control. It is nice. The problem is, this is a Hilux, which means that at its core, this is a vehicle that's meant to work. This is a vehicle that is meant to be carrying payloads. This is a vehicle that's meant to be towing things. This is something that people use at job sites. This is the sort of thing that is meant to do dirty work for a living. That's what a Hilux does. Now, to that end, I wonder, given the fact that this car already has a compromised payload and a compromised towing capacity, I can only imagine that with this relatively small battery, if you were to put anything in the truck bed or if you were to tow anything behind you, that range is just going to be pretty much useless. And as a truck to drive to the work site and back, I wonder why it is that the only plug point in this truck is in the center console and not in the truck bed, like we've seen before from vehicles like the Ford Ranger. This, to me, just feels like a very heavily compromised package. Now, make no mistake, I will reiterate again that if you're looking for a truck to drive about in town, then this makes perfect sense, because unlike a big diesel-powered Hilux, you're not going to be wasting fuel when you're stuck in traffic. The adaptive cruise control feels a lot smoother. Even the lane centering assist in this truck feels like what you get from something like a Toyota Camry. However, it's the rest of this package that just doesn't seem to jive with the rest of the car. The truck is fine. As a product, this is totally acceptable. It is just the lack of battery power and usable range that hobbles this car quite significantly. I stepped into this feeling very divided over it because I do think that electric trucks have a place in the world. For example, if you are just a truck person, there are plenty of people who love the driving experience of a truck. An electric Hilux makes a lot of sense because, again, you're not wasting all your money on very, very expensive diesel, only to then waste it in traffic jams. However, even with my experience with EVs, with this car fully charged and seeing a range of about 257 kilometers, it's not great. If that had said something like 350, 400 kilometers, then that wouldn't have been an issue at all. But with only 257 kilometers on the clock to drive about in town, that doesn't really inspire confidence. On top of that, when you account for the fact that if you are specifically looking for an electric pickup truck, there is also the GAC T9 EV, which will do about 400 kilometers on a full charge, although it does so with the compromise of active safety features because that truck doesn't offer AEB or adaptive cruise control or anything of that sort. And if you want neither of those things, well, tough, because that's basically all you've got in the truck segment. So I finish this review, or rather I conclude this review on a rather confusing note because I still don't know how I feel about this truck. Make no mistake, the Hilux EV is the best Hilux they have ever made. However, if it had a diesel engine, then that would have been much better because as an electric truck, this is a very, very compromised package. I just wish that this had come as a hybrid, perhaps a petrol hybrid maybe, or perhaps even a plug-in hybrid, as we're now beginning to see from trucks coming out of China. Because as a full EV, with the limitations and compromises required in order to fit a battery pack into this IMV platform, it just doesn't make sense. I imagine that the primary buyers of this truck are going to be either people who are really, really into trucks, or fleet buyers looking to have something to add to their ESG report by saying that we have electrified our lineup of pickup trucks. Because aside from that, this truck makes no sense. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2026 Toyota Hilux EV. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icons, and invite every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.